From KUNC and the NPR network, this is In the NoCo. I'm Brad Turner, in today for Aaron O'Toole. Find a path forward, or we'll figure out one for you. Those were the marching orders that federal regulators gave to negotiators from the 7 states that rely on Colorado River water. It was a big ask. The agreement over how to share river water was a century old and overdue for an update. Severe drought strained the river and its reservoirs. Cities in the region from Denver to Los Angeles had grown dramatically over the decades. So negotiators from various states worked for years without agreeing how to divvy up the river. And now federal officials are moving forward with their vow to take control. Last week at a conference in Boulder, they announced they plan to call the shots for the next decade. So, with reservoirs in the Colorado River Basin at alarmingly low levels, will this arrangement help or create more disagreements? Alex Hager has covered the Colorado River for KUNC News, as well as KJZZ, who are our partners in the Mountain West News Bureau. And he joins us now to share his insights. Alex, welcome.
Hi, Brad.
Alex, these talks have been grinding along for years. Colorado, Wyoming, Utah, Arizona, New Mexico, Nevada, California, they all use a portion of the river's water. How close did they get to a new agreement on divvying up the water in the past few years?
In short, they have not really gotten close at all. They have been spending those years negotiating, meeting periodically, talking about their differences, and trying to find a path forward. The one thing they have in common is that the leaders for a long time of these states have been saying we need to find some sort of collective solution to our collective problem, which is there is not enough water in the river to meet current demand, and we need to bring that demand down. However, where they disagree is on how exactly to bring that demand down. And so because of that, they have spent over a year now just digging in their heels on existing negotiation points. So the place that we're at right now, we have seen one side, the lower basin states of Arizona, California, and Nevada, propose some mandatory cutbacks to their water use. The upper basin states, Colorado, Utah, Wyoming, and New Mexico, have not done the same. And like you said, now we're at a point where because they can't agree, the federal government is going to have to come up with some plan for them. And if they do that, things could get really messy. There could be big lawsuits that could end up in the Supreme Court. It's not really what anyone wanted at the outset of these negotiations, but it's where we are today.
Alex, before we dig into that a little more, can you paint a picture of how much less water these states are fighting over than was in the river a century ago?
Well, what we're looking at here is a climate change-fueled drought that goes back to about the year 2000. So now we're talking more than 2 decades of a gradual downturn in the amount of water that shows up in the American West every year. And because of that, the places where we store the water have been getting depleted and depleted and depleted. Lake Powell, the nation's second largest reservoir, is only about a quarter full, maybe less depending on the day. And because of that, there's a lot of anxiety about how much water there is to go around. When you run out of those reserves, there aren't many more places you can turn. So we have seen time and time again, year after year, drier conditions than we used to get 2 to 3 decades ago. And because that has been happening year after year after year, climate scientists say even 3, 4, 5 consecutive years of the most epic, snowiest, powderiest winter you've ever seen would maybe be enough to bring things back to normal. And the odds of that happening year after year after year are very unlikely. So there has been a resetting of the baseline for how much water the 7 states that use the Colorado River can expect for the cities that depend on this water, for the massive multi-billion-dollar agriculture industry, for the 30 indigenous tribes that rely on the water, for the birds and fish and plants that live along the river's banks.
Part of the federal plan to manage the river calls for revisiting the agreement every 2 years over the next decade. Becky Mitchell, Colorado's negotiator, spoke skeptically about that plan. She called it a series of, quote, Band-Aids. What does she mean by that, and why is updating the agreement every 2 years a problem for water managers across the Southwest?
I think this can be viewed as a series of Band-Aids because previous agreements have been much longer. Recent agreements to manage the Colorado River have lasted for 20 years. And the one that we're looking at on the table right now would be basically a 10-year deal with a series of 2-year check-ins along the way. And the reason that there's some pushback on those 2-year check-ins is basically if states couldn't get together through the last 2+ years of negotiating, who's to say that they will be able to do it if you give them another 2-year deadline? There are century-old rivalries between these states. Huge discussions about who should feel the pain of cutting back on water use. And it is not something that is easy for these states to solve. It's why they have been stuck in this impasse for a while here. And they're saying they will be very difficult negotiations every 2 years if we have to do this again. The other reason that the 2-year check-ins get a little bit of pushback is, right now we're at a position where we need a major reset on how we use water across this region. We're going to need big, painful cuts that are going to have significant impacts to maybe where people live and the way that they live and the way that we grow our produce. And that's the kind of thing that state leaders say they need more time to figure out. Basically, because the stakes are so high, they need more time to figure out how exactly they're going to decide who cuts back. And, they've said 2 years is not enough time to make those big sweeping decisions.
Yeah, if I manage water for a few million people in Phoenix or Denver, 2 years isn't a very long look forward.
Yeah, that's kind of what they're saying.
Federal regulators will unveil their plan officially later this summer. I have a sense that the Fed stepping in and taking control after years of threats is a milestone for the future of the river. How much of a turning point do you think this new plan will be?
I think it represents a big turning point in that for a long time, states have been really the only ones to decide how water gets managed. But in another sense, it depends what the feds say. Are they going to attempt to make big cutbacks that could get them sued and, make decisive action about here's who has to use less water, we're putting our foot down? Or are they going to come up with something that is a little less legally risky, but doesn't really make those big cutbacks? A plan that keeps the river flowing, keeps reservoirs operating somewhat normally for just a couple years, and doesn't really shift the baseline, but keeps them out of court.
Alex, the situation for the river has been grim for years at this point due to severe drought and overuse. Did you hear from anyone who's optimistic or excited about this plan to have federal management?
Overwhelmingly, the mood on the river is not a good one. The situation with the amount of water in it is really bad, and the people in charge of responding to it basically have not responded to it. There is a little bit of optimism that maybe federal intervention could be a bit of a kick in the pants to the negotiators to kind of get back to the table and really figure this out. But I would say optimism is in very short supply among people who think about the Colorado River.
How's the state of Colorado likely to do under this new agreement? Will the state see less water than previously?
It depends a little bit on the details that we see from the feds. But when we look at proposed plans, drafts that the federal government has toyed with over the course of the last year, the heaviest cuts tend to come for the Phoenix and Tucson areas because that's where the feds think they have the most authority. So that is not to say that Colorado will have no water cutbacks, but if it is the feds that are putting the deal together mostly by themselves, we are expecting that it will be probably more cuts to states that are not Colorado.
Alex Hager covers the Colorado River for our partners KJZZ and the Mountain West News Bureau. We'll put a link to some of his reporting in our show notes and at KUNC.org. Alex, thanks for speaking with me.
Thanks for having me, Brad. It's good to be here.
That's it today for In the NoCo. I'm Brad Turner. Thanks for listening.